everybody had a wonderful lunch. I know I did. So I'm gonna do roll call to establish a quorum, and we will move on with the meeting. Dolores Trujillo is here. Vice President Mary Fagan.
I'm here, but I may have to hop off for another, hopefully short period of time. So if I miss a vote or something, I know there's still a quorum, but I'll get back on as soon as I can. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Elizabeth Woods.
Elizabeth Woods, present.
Jovita Dominguez. Okay. I don't know if Jovita made it back on. Susan Naranjo.
Susan Naranjo, present.
Thank you, Susan. David Lawler.
David Lawler, present.
Tricia Nguyen.
Present.
Vicki Granowitz.
Present.
Let's see. Jovita Dominguez. Okay. Reza, I believe
Jovita's here.
Wonderful. Okay. So we have establishment of a quorum. So we're going to move on to item 9.0. Tricia?
Okay. Thanks very much, Dolores. And before I get started on item 9, I really just want to again thank Lori and staff for taking time to do educational pieces on these subject areas, because as a fairly new member, it really helps me. It gives me context for some of the decisions that we need to make. So Lori, is there someone who is presenting 9.1, or would you? Okay. Well, before we get started, this is an informational item on assessing and mapping workflow timeframes and procedures to streamline internal processes. And there's a lot of detail in this item. And Lori, I'm glad there's someone who will, walk us through the high points.
Yes, definitely. Board moderator, can you elevate Shannon Johnson, please? I believe it's her that's going to be presenting, and maybe even Tim Bunter as well. So if you can elevate Tim Bunter also. And then I believe Scarlett as well. And I think she's on there as RNS. You can find her. Thank you. And then Shannon or Tim, do you know which one of you? I think it's Tim that's going, but Shannon,
Hi,
I know
everybody.
you're
it's Shannon, and I am the Enforcement Division Chief. But today, Tim Bunger, who is one of the Enforcement Deputy Chiefs, will be presenting EIC for you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Shannon said, my name is Tim Bunger, and I'm the Deputy Chief over Discipline and Probation Units. Here presenting today on first agenda item 9.1 for the Enforcement and Investigation Unit updates. The full details are in your board material packets, but just wanted to highlight a few different areas. First one being that we are still working with OIO, the Office of Organizational Improvement, with the Department of Consumer Affairs for mapping our various processes and finding where we can make efficiencies. They're currently working with our probation units and making their way through our entire enforcement division. I'm also happy to announce the hiring and onboarding of Alina Shev. She is the new Staff Services Manager 1 in our Complaint Intake Unit, and she comes to the BRN from the Board of Accountancy, where she was previously their Citation Unit Lead, and will be joined with Jessica Perry as the 2 Complaint Intake Managers. And we're very lucky to have her with us. The vacant Staff Services Manager 1 positions in the Discipline Unit and Probation Unit recruitments are still ongoing, with interviews being held last week and this week, and we're hoping to have that position filled by the beginning of October. We are also actively, as always, recruiting for expert practice consultants. If you or anyone on this meeting today is interested, we do have information in our board meeting materials for the application and how to get additional information. Specifically, we need experts in the area of long-term care, skilled nursing, acute rehabilitation, hospice, home health, outpatient ambulatory and clinic, cosmetic and Botox, chemical dependency, oncology, and emergency room. We are also continuing to work with the Division of Investigation on the pilot project. Over the past month, we've met with them to make some minor tweaks to the pilot process, and we're currently in the final review stages of that. And the pilot is currently set to expire December of this year. However, we are looking to extend it as it has been quite successful. And then our intervention unit is actively recruiting to fill 11 intervention evaluation committee vacancies, and those are located throughout the state. And I'm here for any questions or concerns you have regarding 9.1.
Any comments or questions from the board?
Okay. As there was no call for vote, it was informational only. I believe we have to move into public comment before moving to 9.2.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate your
Real quick,
presentation.
sorry to interrupt.
Go
A
ahead.
couple things really quick before we move forward is I know that we did elevate Scarlett Treviso, and I wasn't sure if she was going to give an information update on the investigation unit as part of this agenda item. It is agendaized for that.
Good afternoon, everybody. The documents are there. If anybody has any questions, I'm certainly here to answer. There wasn't, Tim already reported on the DFI pilot project. So if there's any additional questions, I'm happy to answer.
And this is Shannon Johnson, the Enforcement Division Chief. There's also within all the statistical tables, both enforcement and investigation data as well.
Yeah, there was sure a lot of information in those tables, and it was kind of nice to see how we're doing, you know, compared to other state agencies that do discipline. So thank you for that.
Yes, you're correct now, Tim. With not a vote required, we can go out to public comment.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Board EO Melvie, there are no public requests for comments. Would you like me to close this window?
I do, but we can also ask the chair, Tricia Wynn, if that's
It
something
wasn't.
that's...
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure who was running at this point.
Please don't worry about it. Thank you very much, BRN moderator. Yes, please go ahead and close this item. I'll give board members one more chance to ask any questions or make a comment on item 9.0. Again, it's information only, so we're not going to be taking any action on this item.
Tricia, I have one request. We do have a presenter for 9.3 from National Council of State Boards of Nursing. He has joined from his time zone, and so I'm asking if we can reorder and take 9.3 now instead of moving on to 9.2. I'm just going to take it out of order. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. So this is item discussion and possible action regarding participation in the National Council of State Boards of Nursing Substance Use Disorder Monitoring Programs. And I'm going to go ahead and send it over to Richard Smiley. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And board moderator, there was a PowerPoint that was submitted. Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Richard, it's all yours. Are you able to unmute?
Can you hear me?
Very, very quietly.
I cannot make it clear. I cannot hear anybody.
Okay. Did you want to try to
It is
log
silent
out?
at my end, and I am not sure if anybody is hearing me.
Are you able to
I
send
can hear
him
him
a
reasonably
message?
well.
Board moderator, I'm able to hear. Are you able to send him a message? I will send him an email right now, let him know that we are able to hear him.
Loretta, should I dial in the phone number?
We can hear him just fine.
Yeah. Are you able to communicate with him at all, Mark?
No, not at all. I see that he's got a headset and he's able to mute and unmute himself.
I can't. Here, let me show you. I'm on a webinar. I can't hear.
Board moderator, are you able to send a message directly to him on WebEx here? Or is that not a possibility? I'm sure he can read his screen, but may not be able to hear us. And because the chat function is not open, I don't have the ability to send him a message on here as well. But I have sent him a couple emails.
No, I am not able to send him a message.
Okay.
He may be trying to call in. It sounds like he's getting some help on his end, so maybe a couple minute break or.
I can give some background on this, while like how it came about and why we're considering this.
That would be great, Lori. Thank you. Yeah, let's go ahead and start. Thank you.
Hello?
Thank you. We're able to hear you. Can you hear us, Richard?
I can hear you finally. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yay. Thank you.
3 cheers for the NCSBN help team. The guy volunteered himself too. He heard my troubles.
Wonderful. Thank you. I haven't given any background yet, Richard. I was about to, but if you want to go ahead, you absolutely can.
Okay. Thank you very much for putting up with this. I had clear pictures of all of you. I could see everybody was talking, and it was silent here. So, okay. I can go through this in like 5 to 10 minutes. Is that okay? Do I have that time? Okay. I'm Richard Smiley. I'm a senior statistician in the Nursing Regulation Department at NCSBN. And we did a study, I guess I'm not controlling the slides. Who's not sure where? There we go. Okay.
Yeah. Just say next slide.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. We did a study of nursing, of what we were studying was alternative to discipline programs for substance use disorder programs. And we were trying to find out the factors that contributed to program success. And so what happened is we published this study, I think a year ago, And what it showed is that we had found that there were some factors that we thought would contribute to substance use disorder programs being successful. And based on those, what we intend to do is follow up at a program level and try to address some basic study questions. And those are the questions you see here. Does the use of evidence-based substance use disorder program guidelines positively impact program completion among nurses with substance use disorder, SUD? Is SUD program completion correlated with successful reentry to practice? And does the evidence-based SUD program guidelines affect program attrition among nurses with substance use disorder? A quick comment here, where the second question comes from is when we did the previous study, the only information we had was we were able to coordinate with 14 boards of nursing, and we produced a retrospective study looking at their data, and we went through Affinity Health Services, and we had data about what the nurses did in the substance use disorder program up to the point of program completion. Because the data was coming from the programs, we did not know what happened to the nurses after they finished the program. And all evidence suggests and shows that it was reasonable to assume that if we used program completion as an outcome variable, that would be highly correlated with successful re-entry to practice. So it was appropriate to use it. But we didn't know that for sure because we weren't following them into practice. So in addition to checking the guidelines that we hypothesized from this retrospective study, in addition to confirming that, yes, these guidelines do make a difference, we want to see if the program completion is successfully correlated with reentry to practice. And finally, the guidelines, as you will see very quickly, involve slightly more testing and may involve a little more cost. So we want to see what impact does this have on a program attrition. Like, as a result of implementing these guidelines, are you in a situation where the perfect becomes the enemy of the good, where, okay, you've got these great guidelines that are very effective, that the people that participate, but it chases people away from participating in the first place. So that's the approach we're taking. And if you can go to the next slide. And so, specifically, the approach we're going to use is we're going to be doing these three things. We're going to be comparing baseline program completion rates, which we more or less already have, between established SUD monitoring programs and the programs that adopt the guidelines. And I'll be showing you the guidelines in a second. We'll be tracking the study participants through re-entry to practice after successful SUD program completion. And we'll be comparing program attrition rates between established programs to programs that adopt the guidelines, once again, just to see what happens with the attrition rates. And you can move to the next slide. And so these are the specific guidelines that were suggested and developed out of the previous study. That what we found is, we think, if done right, 3 years without a relapse is sufficient length for a program. And so we're recommending that programs, try to go to 3 years. We understand that some programs do it for 5 years already, and if that's what you want to do, we can accommodate that. But we think, it's possible to do it 3 years with the other guidelines that you see here in place. The second one is frequency of check-ins. And what we're suggesting is that people check in daily, including holidays to weekends, to see if they're going to be tested. This is a subtle one, but the big difference is if people are only checking in during work days, and, especially like over holidays, like if you do this call, like say you have to call in the day before you be tested to see if you're going for testing, and you call in the Thursday before a holiday and you find out that you're not being tested, until that Friday, you know that the next time you could possibly test it is the following Tuesday. You know, for something like alcohol, which disappears in the system in that time, it's very easy for somebody to skirt, you know, to really avoid a positive test and still not get off the alcohol. You know, that's the one example. So we're really encouraging if daily check-ins can be done, this is optimal. The third one is the biggest and the most important, which is we're suggesting that drug testing be at least 2 times a month and random in type and test. And this is the trade-off that allows that the 3 years without a relapse instead of 5 years for a program to be implemented, because we discovered that for programs that do at least two tests a month, you know, if they go 3 years without a relapse, that's a sufficient length of time. You don't need to go 5 years. They do just as good with the 3 years and the testing at least twice a month. And not many programs do the 2 tests a month. So that's kind of the trade-off, is that we're suggesting more frequent testing up front, trade-off being that you don't have to go as long in the program. And then finally, structured support group meetings at least twice a month. Mutual support group, and a mutual support group is, you know, something like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, something like that, at least once a week. And these are the guidelines we found. And if you could go to the next page. And so basically what we're trying to recruit is that for programs that are willing to participate, nurses enrolled agree to implement to the best of their ability the NCSBN guidelines, and you know, and then collect the data that we ask. And I have supplementary materials, which I think I sent to Loretta, but I could also send on again if need be. We're constantly updating. I can send an improved version of that sort of tells, you know, this is the data we'd like to collect and when we'd like to collect it. That is standard. And the big thing is what we're looking at is we'd like the cohort to begin September 1 and then continue on for a year. So we'd like for nurses that enroll in let's say your SUD program in this period of time between September 1 of this year and August 31st of next year, for that 1 year period to follow the guidelines over and see what happens. And what we would be doing is we'd be collecting data for 5 years, ideally 3 years in the program, and then hopefully we'd be able to follow them into practice for 2 years. And you can move to the next slide. And I think that, and then the type of data being collected is participant characteristics, like this would be demographic characteristics, maybe the education the nurse had, the type of license, the age, maybe the specialty, stuff like that. Data about the contract, what the data, you know, what the nurse agreed to at signing the contract when they entered the program. Any changes that take place, because sometimes this happens with individuals. You know, you may try to stick to the NCSBN guidelines and it may just not be possible. You may need to be extending their stay or changing something, and that's fine as long as we can track that, as long as we know who that is. And then process data is the biggest thing we're collecting, which is how frequently are you being asked to test? Are you taking the test? What's the result of the drug test? How often are you checking in, et cetera? You know, all of that data. And then at the end, the program attrition and completion data, you know, like for people that entered or inquired about that program, did they follow through and participate? Did people who enter the program actually complete the data, complete the program? And that's of this cohort we're talking about. And then finally, from the boards, we'd be wanting to know, did they successfully re-enter practice? And when they re-entered practice, were there any incidents over those 2 years, or was there any discipline over the 2 years? And I think you can move to the next slide. and can't stress enough that the information will be kept confidential. In fact, the way we're collecting the data, we at NCSBN will not even know who the individuals are that we're collecting the data from. We'll know individual records, but we won't know who those records belong to. And the only nursing board coordinators and other permitted individuals from study sites will be able to view the nurse-specific data. And then at all stages, NCSBN staff will not be privy to any identifiable information, and we will not attempt to identify who any of the nurses are. And the only data, and we will not be reporting individual data, we'll be reporting it all in aggregate, because this is just, at maybe, I'm not even sure we'd be doing it at program. We might do it at program level, and even then we wouldn't be identifying which programs it's or states specifically from. We'd just be keeping it very aggregate basis, not just for research purposes. And I think I have one more slide. Could be wrong. I think. Yeah, and then this is the timeline. So phase 1, a replication of the 2020 SUD monitoring program analysis, will consist of nurses starting in participating program between September of this year and August of next year. The nurses will be followed through program completion, which goes approximately 3 years. And in phase 2, which will extend to 2027, approximately 2 years, they'll be tracked for re-entry to practice. And so that's an overview of the program. I don't know if I sent you any other slides. If I did, I think this is everything, but you can check.
This was the extent
This
of the
was
slides,
it. Yeah,
so thank
that's
you.
what I thought.
No,
Well,
nothing else.
thank you very much, Richard. That is very interesting. Before we go to board member comments, maybe we could turn this over to staff for a couple of comments. There are discrepancies between what we proposed on probation and what this lays out. So I'd love maybe to hear from Loretta.
Sure.
And also from Shannon, and then, anybody else. And we'll open up then for board discussion. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So Richard, please continue to stay available until we go to vote for this. So when I was at the Executive Officers Summit in Chicago, there was discussion about this research study. I knew that our board is always looking for evidence for everything that we're doing now. That is the new process that we're doing. And with NCSBN saying this is what they want to do, I felt that this was a perfect opportunity for us to join and at least be part of the data collection, especially understanding that we have the largest nursing population in the nation. I felt that we would be a wonderful contributor to that. So I brought this information back, excuse me, and I shared it to with Shannon Johnson. And I said, hey, is this anything that we'd be interested in joining? And Shannon thought that it was a great idea to join. And so in order to join, we would have to commit to this. I would then sign the contract, and we would move forward with this study. So Shannon, just to kind of, if you're available to kind of go over specifics and talk about similarities and areas that were not similar in collection of the study information. And then Richard, I believe my understanding at the summit that we attended is that it is okay if we're not completely in alignment with the NCSBN recommendations, that you guys would collect the data that we're on alignment with and maybe use us as the one of the boards that are not following all of the NCSBN criteria. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think for us the biggest thing is just knowing what the differences are. As long as I think as long as we can track it, we can adjust for it. As long as we know, okay, this is different, we can account for that. And clearly for us, not all of those guidelines are equal. For us, the important one is the drug testing thing. That's really what we're trying to study. I'll be right up front. That's the drug testing frequency, because we think that's there's evidence that's the biggest factor. And it's almost like, if that one can't be followed, then, the others, I don't know. So
I just want to address, so we here in California under Department of Consumer Affairs, we have uniform standards that has been adopted. And so all of the healing arts boards have to follow those uniform standards as far as testing is concerned. And so depending on the criteria of the participant at the time, you know, if they're employed, it affects their testing. They test more frequently. If they're not employed, it's obviously a less frequency for us. I think a minimum of like once a month. However, when they first start the program, we're mandated to have them testing at least 56 to, and I don't have the table in front of me, but it is quite frequently, and it's at least 3 times a month in their first year of participation in our treatment. So I think there are some items, and testing is going to be an impacted one. And I don't know if there is a way around that with this program, if you're saying that testing is the biggest factor.
Well, I mean, if you're telling me that almost all your new entries are testing once a week, the first year you're in there, you're going to meet our standards just in the first year. So by all means,
so you're saying at minimum twice.
Yeah, it's almost
okay,
like
at minimum.
Because I think, you know, even if this is a different approach, what we're getting at, I mean, I think what we really are finding out is more frequent testing. The more frequent testing you do up front, the better. I think this is really what's being studied. And so what we're trying to encourage most of the boards do not, I mean, most of the boards do, once a month or less. And so we're trying to get them up to, can you do twice a month? I mean, you're already doing once a week. My God, that's like,
yeah, our
see, what we're suggesting as a trade-off is, gee, okay, you're doing 5, let's say you're doing 5 years once a month. That's 60 tests over the course of 5 years. And what we're saying is redistribute those tests. So maybe you're doing them over the course of 3 years, but you're doing them more frequently. And your approach is something we're still interested in study, which is, you know, okay, instead of redistributing them so you're doing them over 3 years, redistribute them so you're doing them over 1 year. That's fascinating to us. Of course, we're going to take you on.
So Richard, I have a question. So you would be following these participants. Now, we also have what we call intervention evaluation committee members. Each of the committees consists of 5 individuals that oversee the care for each of these participants. They do the initial intake meeting with them. They determine the care, and then they meet with them throughout their participation in the program to determine, you know, when we're going to return them to work, and then the limitations of work and so forth. Would this, going through this, would it entail you to also need to be in contact with the committees or just strictly the participants?
I mean, I don't know if we need to be, you know, and when you say, you know, what do you mean in touch with the participants? Because once again,
where would the data be coming from that you're obtaining? Would we need to have?
Well, I'm like either, and I think that's the appropriate question. That's good. If you have the data and provide it to us directly, which I think one state will be doing, that would be okay with us. If you're going through, I mean, I don't know if you're using a drug testing vendor. A lot of the programs use vendors in the field who actually collect this data, who actually monitor.
We do have, so we have a third-party contractor, it's Maximus, and they are a contractor that oversees and pretty much runs our intervention program. So we do have in-office staff.
They collect the data.
And we also use Vault, which used to be First Source Solution, which is our drug tester. And that's for both probation and intervention. But yes, we do. So we do use third party.
Okay, because if they could collect the data and provide it, that would be fine. That would be fine. As far as providing the data to us. Okay, so and that's what we mean by we really don't want to know the identity of who the individuals are, whose data you're capturing. Now, as far as you're saying a committee, I mean, I think any assessments that the committee have that of the progress of these nurses or that would be useful. I mean, I don't, like I assume there's, if there's decisions made or if it shows up as changes in the status of whether or not the nurse can go to work or something like that, that would be the type of data we'd love to have and love to be captured.
And then of course that would all be redacted. So, and how many participants are you looking at so for instance, California, how many participants would be beneficial for this study?
Well, I once again, you're in a special case because, you're going to get a lot more. What we were looking for, our study design was such that, assuming we weren't getting states the size of California, that we were getting sort of moderate states, for our numbers to work, we thought we'd need 5 to 10 boards because we thought they'd be contributing maybe 50 to 100 nurses who would meet the criteria, who would be falling into this cohort. That was I think my estimate was, I could guess that for a typical state, there might be 80 or 90 nurses entering over the next year. So what I'd be saying is, gee, anybody who meets the criteria, for a year, we'd love to follow, but if that's an overwhelming number, I mean, there's different ways we can do this, including just saying, okay, for California, maybe it's just the first quarter rather than the first year that gets followed. But I'm not sure how many nurses you'd expect to be entering the program in the course of a year. You might have an idea. I don't.
Yeah, well, we could definitely, I mean, I was just wondering from NCSBN's perspective, what would be ideal. I don't think that we would have a problem of obviously obtaining the data. I don't want to speak for a third party vendor, but I think that we would probably both love to be part of this survey and to really look at the outcomes. I'm sure we as well as a lot of the other boards across the United States are suffering right now in our intervention programs, and we're looking for all the help we can get as far as why our participation levels are low and what we can do to assist that. So I think this is a great idea, and if the board votes to pass it, I will do whatever needs to be done to assist you.
Thank you very much, Shannon. That was kind of a good kind of start for us to begin a conversation. The one thing that I saw that jumped out on me was, participating in kind of structured programs. It looked like you had a meeting once every couple of weeks, and we have a much more demanding.
Oh, that's fine. We're fine. Ours were, for those things, it was minimal. Like a minimum of this. If you're doing more than that, we're not going to stop you. That's wonderful. Okay. As long as we have the data, we know how often you're meeting and that's
great.
That's fine.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you very much, Richard. I'd like to open it up to questions from any of the other board members. What's your impression of this? And is this something that you would support?
This is Dolores. I would definitely support this and help them with the data, collection. I think it's a great opportunity.
Thanks, Dolores. Anybody else with questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Betty. I know our members on the BRN who have problems. One of the things they have a problem with is the cost of the program. Is there going to be any cost to the participants in relation to this particular program?
Richard, I'm not sure if you heard that. They were wondering. if there
Yeah, I know, because you're talking.
I don't believe there would be, since I think
I
we're
don't-
doing it
No,
more
I don't think there
often
would.
than what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
What was the
And-
answer? Was people talking
and-
with one another?
Can I just clarify too, Betty, just to answer that for you? There's about, I believe, 7 boards right now, Healing Arts boards under Department of Consumer Affairs that Maximus oversees for the program. BRN is one of the only programs that actually pays the program fees for the participants. They are only obligated to $25 a month. That doesn't include, though, however, the testing fees outside of that and some other fees, but we do pay the majority of their program costs at BRN.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I had a question.
This is David. I just want to add, my questions were answered in the previous discussion, but I too think this is a good idea to collect the data. I'm not sure what we'll do with it, but I'm for it.
Thank you, David.
Good opportunity.
Thank you, David. Was someone else going to have, did someone
Yeah,
else have?
this is Vicki Granowitz.
Great, Vicki, thank you.
I realize that what I'm going to ask is a work pill, and that might be why you decided not to. But since some of the programs looked at continuing the program for 5 years, I'm wondering why you, or if you considered doing some kind of testing at the 5-year mark to see how their recidivism is after 5 years, even though the program would sort of officially end at the 3-year mark. I worked with addicts for over a decade, and it's a really difficult disease.
Oh yeah, I think for us, once again, you're asking me, I'm basing this on my past experience of the last group of states and set of data that I worked with, where for many of the states it was 5-year programs, and for quite a few, 5-year meant that the nurse really wasn't working until the 5 years were up. And so that's part of what shaped this, this strategy of, let's see if we could do, if we could do it this way, where it's 3 years and then we're studying them, in practice 2 years after. I don't know if you're asking, like, should we consider extending the study time longer than 5 years? I mean, we are trying to get results. I think that's one of the reasons why we don't want to go past 2027 to be getting, and because presumably we'd get the results and then, probably the next year, 2028, be publishing. We really don't want to extend that out, but we do have some states who already will be willing to participate, who are 3-year, who will be doing the 3 years, and the contract ends. And we do have some states that are a mixture that will be going out to 5 years. So we are still keeping programs that will have 5-year contracts, just because we'll still have information on whether or not, even over those 5 years, they were able to successfully complete the program in 5 years, even though we won't necessarily have follow-up data on those nurses. So that's also why it's important to us to know what's the length of the contract, even because, like I said, for some of these states, we are going to have both types. We're going to have some that are in 3 years and some that are in 5, and we want to be able to track all of that so we can make sense of it, so we know what the expectations were of the nurses. And also, if the nurses relapse, then often it gets extended. So we need to know, are they relapsing? What's happening afterwards? And
yeah, I don't want people to not be able to work. I'm just looking at relapse, and if there was some way.
This is Shannon. Just to respond to that. So for us here in California at BRN, our evaluation committees determine the care plan for those participants. Our terms are usually 3 to 5 years. It depends on the progress that participant's making. And we do test throughout all the way through the end to ensure that they are clean and we are releasing them. So I think what Richard's saying is regardless of what our plan is, they're looking at least 3 years, but for us, we could even go out to 5 years if need be, depending on, the progress.
The individual, absolutely.
Yes.
That answers my question.
Yeah, and yeah, and that's why, like, from what you're describing as a program, we totally welcome you, with your testing, your testing frequency as it is right now. You don't need to change anything. I think you're a fascinating case. So, we'd love to have you in, and so I don't think I think you'd already be following our guidelines from everything you've described. So I don't necessarily think you'd need to be changing anything.
Thank you, Richard. Shannon, I have a question for you. Could we make a motion that gave you some discretion on, entering into an agreement with NCSBN?
I guess you as a board could make whatever motion you would like. I don't know what kind of discretion you want to give me, but I would think that moving forward, overseeing this program for the board, that I would obviously be involved with the obtaining of all of this data and trying to coordinate that for the board.
Well, thank you. Just to the extent that there are discrepancies between what they're collecting and what we normally impose. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that BRN participate in the NCSBN Substance Use Disorder Monitoring Program. Is there a second?
I'll second it. Woods.
Woods, thank you very much, Betty. Okay, we have a motion and a second. So we're, Dolores, go ahead and then we'll open it up for public comment. Go ahead, Dolores. Thank you.
Do you want to put any time limit on our motion or just leave it open-ended?
It would just be for this specific one, so we would not need a time limit. If we altered this in any way, it would have to come back in front of the board.
Yeah, okay,
Yep.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So board moderator, would you please go ahead and open public comment?
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment."
This is Reza. While we give a minute for people to type in, the things that caught my attention the most, and by the way, board legal counsel, was the confidentiality of participant information. And I definitely heard Richard kind of emphasizing repeatedly that information would only be reported out in aggregate and de-identified, and that they really have no interest or desire in knowing participant identity and things like that. I think that's a piece that we can kind of work out offline, and so maybe if this does pass, keep me apprised of how the program is being rolled out, and I'd like to just make sure. And I don't know if this is kind of a fundamental thing that I didn't quite understand. Are participants aware that the study is being conducted and that they're even in a de-identified way? Is that generally, are they aware that it's?
For most of the programs, they are not, but they certainly can be made aware of. And one of the states we are participating with, what's going to happen is we've been drafting in fact, they drafted like a short paragraph just describing that the study is taking place. Your data will, you are being included in this study, but it's anonymous, and sort of detailing that, you will be part of this study, but it's anonymous and will not be shared. Individual, in other words, that de-identified. So it'll only be shared in aggregate. I could send if that's ever needed. I could send an example of the statement that they put together, which I thought was pretty good. But it laid out that it informed the participants that they will be part of this study. This was after some negotiation asking if they could opt out, and we did go through IRB approval, and IRB approved the approach we're taking. We really feel like we're not in a position to allow the nurses to opt out simply because of the nature of the study, where we're doing everything in aggregate. And if you have the opportunity for people to opt out, we strongly suspect it would just bias the results, because the ones that are going to opt out are the ones that aren't doing well. Or at least, there's good reason to believe that, if you just only are collecting the data from the people that that agree that, okay, I'll participate in this, that's the results would be questioned that we find. So
I understand. So is there, if the board moves forward with this, is there like a contract or an MOU or some kind of a document between NCSBN and the board, or is there any kind of standard there?
Yeah, can they? We've drafted a data use agreement that we asked the participating board, the vendor, whoever's sending data, and NCSBN to sign, so that all parties sign on to it.
Okay.
As far as what will or won't be shared.
Okay, great.
And I'll be in touch with Loretta and make sure that you have the most up-to-date version of that document.
Thank you. I look forward to that.
Thank you, BRN moderator. Where are we in the public comment?
There are no requests for public comments. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please do. So we have a motion and a second. I'm going to go ahead and call the roll. So Tricia Nguyen votes aye. Dolores Trujillo?
Yes.
Mary Fagan?
Mary Fagan, yes.
Elizabeth Woods?
Woods, yes.
Jovita Dominguez?
Jovita Dominguez, yes.
Susan Naranjo, sorry.
Susan Naranjo, yes.
Yes. David Lawler?
David, yes.
And Vicky Granowitz.
Granowitz votes yes.
Great, that's unanimous, that passes. Thank you very much for that item. So we're going to go back to item 9.2, which is a discussion and possible action regarding the appointment and reappointment of intervention evaluation committee members. So each EIC has have 5 members on it. They're regional. There are 3 RNs, 1 physician, and 1 public member that has a specialty in substance abuse or mental health.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Off.
Thank you. So, Lori, who will be presenting on this item?
It will be Tim.
Tim, great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello again. Before getting into the table and individuals themselves, I did need to make a point of clarification on a correction that was made from the agenda item summary as well as the agenda. And that is that the term expiration for these individuals soon to be named is that the term expiration is actually going to be the 30th of June 2016, not July 30th of 2026, excuse me. So the expiration is going to be June 30, 2026.
Thank you.
All right, and I will apologize in advance as I name off these individuals. If I mispronounce their name, it is not intentional. First individual, and this is a mix of both new appointments and reappointments. The first is Gul Ibrahim, physician member, IEC number 3, based in Los Angeles, and that is a new appointment. Next is Kenya Smith, nurse member, IEC 3, Los Angeles for reappointment. Heather Hallmark, nurse member, IEC 5 in Fresno for new appointment. Colleen Burks, nurse member, IEC number 6 in Palm Springs is a new appointment. Betty Jackson Stewart, nurse member, IEC 9, Ontario, as a new appointment. Carol Stanford, public member, IEC 11, Fairfield, as a reappointment. And lastly, David Smith, physician member, IEC 12, Sacramento, and a new appointment. And again, the term expiration for all of those individuals would be June 30th, 2026.
Thank you very much, Tim. Are there any questions or comments on this slate of appointments?
I have a question, Tim. Is this, I think in the previous discussion, you told us that there were 11 vacancies. Do these new appointments, the 5 new appointments, mean that we're now down to 6?
This is Shannon. I'll go ahead and answer that. No, excuse me, that is the 11 is with the new appointments.
Okay.
And then we also do have some additional applicants kind of waiting in the wing. However, the vacancies that we have are the majority of them now are going to be physician and public members, which are not as easy to come by as the RN members. So we're appointing them as we get them, but we do, this does not include that. So there still are 11 vacancies.
Thank you, Shannon. The other thing is, are these people meet? I know we had them regionally because they were meeting individually with the nurses. Are they meeting virtually now?
Yes, they fall under the same as the board and committee meetings, other committee meetings that we have, and we are doing virtual meetings now. So throughout the rest of the year, we're virtual, which has allowed us, I must say too, it's allowed us to fill some of these vacancies with the applicants because it wasn't dependent on location so much right now, which has been very, very helpful for us in filling these IEC seats.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we maintain this virtual opportunity, if it needs to be regional, right? Or if it could be a group that covers the entire.
Yeah, we are definitely looking at that right now because we're having to kind of foresee the future and what may or may not be and have a plan A, a plan B, and you kind of move as we need to right now. But the most important thing is to have those IECs filled, because if we don't have a quorum, these participants can either maybe risk not being let off of intervention and continue on as a participant longer than necessary, or we don't have them going before the team to ensure that they are following their care plan and that they're not a risk to the public.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you, Shannon, for that. Are there any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, hearing none, then I will move to accept the appointments and reappointments of the IEC members presented. Do I have a second?
This is Mary.
I'll second.
Okay, I got a second from Mary because she's the closest one on my bar. Thank you. We'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Thank you, board moderator.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Committee Chair Nguyen, there are no public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you very much. So we're going to go ahead and take this to a vote. Tricia Nguyen votes aye. Dolores Trujillo,
Yes.
Mary
Aye.
Fagan,
Mary Fagan, yes.
Elizabeth Woods,
Woods, yes.
Jovita Dominguez,
Jovita Dominguez, yes.
Susan Naranjo,
Susan, yes.
David Lawler,
David, yes.
and Vicky Granowitz.
Yes.
Great, that's unanimous. That passes too. And we are now done with the Enforcement Committee. I'm going to turn it back over to Dolores. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to item 10.0, report of the Legislative Committee. 10.1, legislative update and discussion of bills relevant to the Board of Registered Nursing from the 2021 to 2022 legislative session. Is Marissa Clark available? Mark,
Yes,
do you-
she is in the attendees and she is being elevated right now.
Great, thank you.
Everyone, can you see me and hear me? A little bit muffled, Marissa. Can you just again?
Okay. Pull it closer. Awesome. Okay, good afternoon. Happy to be here. My name is Marissa Clark. I'm the Chief of Legislative Affairs here at the Board of Registered Nursing. I'm going to give you a quick kind of update before we dive into our sunset bill. So we are at the tail end of the legislative session, with the legislature having until the end of the month to send all remaining bills to the governor's desk, either for a sign or a veto. And there has been quite a bit of movement since our last meeting at the end of June, with a handful of the bills we're tracking either dying or being amended. So you may have noticed that the list of bills that are no longer advancing has actually grown since our agenda was posted at the beginning of August. And that's because the appropriations committees in both houses met last Thursday to read off the results of all the bills that were on their suspense files, and several more bills that we were tracking are also no longer advancing. So I'll touch upon those. There's a handful of direct impact and then a few direct impacts, so we're separating them that way. Of the direct impact bills, the ones that are no longer advancing are AB 562 from Assemblymember Lowe, AB 646 from Assemblymember Lowe, and AB 1662 from Assemblymember Gibson. And for the indirect bills that are no longer advancing, it's a little bit longer of a list. We have AB 1105 from Assemblymember Rodriguez, AB 2790 from Assemblymember Wicks, SB 213 from Senator Cortese, SB 441 from Senator Hurtado, SB 962 from Senator Jones, and SB 1134 from Senator Melendez. So next, I'll give an update on 6 bills that we're tracking that are still moving in progress and have actually received amendments since we last met at the end of June. Again, 3 of them are categorized as direct impact bills for the board, and 3 of them are indirect impact. So I'll just give a quick summary of each bill, the recent amends, and the board's current position. And then at the end, I'll open it up for any discussion or questions that the members may have, and then we can jump into our sunset bill. So the first one on direct impact is Assembly Bill 852 from Assemblymember Wood. As it's currently written, the bill prohibits a pharmacy, pharmacist, or other practitioner from refusing to dispense or furnish an e-prescription solely because the prescription was not submitted via or is not compatible with their proprietary software, unless that software fails to meet industry standards, federal or state laws, or privacy requirements. The bill also expands the existing list of exceptions to the e-prescription requirement, and some of the expansions now include prescribers who register with the California State Board of Pharmacy that they meet one of the following criteria: that their practice is located in the area of an emergency or disaster that is declared by the government, that they issue 100 or fewer prescriptions per calendar year, or that they are unable to issue electronic data transmission prescriptions due to circumstances outside of their control. And so in terms of the amendments, we have been tracking this bill up until now because as you may remember, it previously held some implementation provisions tied to AB 890. It held a lot of areas in the code where the 103 or the 104 NP kind of needed to be referenced as well. Those have since been removed since our last meeting and are now actually placed in our sunset bill, so they're still active. They just consolidated them with the other provisions and are no longer in this bill. So this bill is focused solely now on that e-prescription requirement. And the board currently has a position of support. So the next bill is Assembly Bill 1604 by Assemblymember Holden. As it's currently written, this bill would modify state civil service examination and appointment practices for the purpose of increasing diversity of applicant pools on employment lists. It would also require all state departments to provide a report to the California Department of Human Resources, or CalHR as it's commonly referred to, that demonstrates the department's progress towards meeting its upward mobility goals. And those goals can include factors such as race, gender, LGBTQ, and disability status to the extent permissible under law. And so previously we have been tracking this bill because it had some language in there that required state boards and commissions to all have at least one volunteer board member or commissioner from an underrepresented community, and also required any state agency, board, or commission that collects demographic data to use a specified collection categories and tabulations when they're tracking and reporting it out. Those provisions have since been removed since our last meeting, and the most recent amends added in the provisions I just touched on at the beginning related to increasing diversity in the state civil service hiring process and having states track and report out on their upward mobility goals. And so the board also currently has a position of support on this bill. And the last on the list of direct impact bills is Assembly Bill 2626 from Assemblymember Calderon. And this bill would prohibit our board, along with the medical board, the osteopathic medical board, and the physician assistant board, from suspending or revoking the certificate or denying an application for licensure for performing an abortion in accordance with existing California law. The bill also prohibits boards from imposing discipline on the licensees if they are disciplined or convicted in another state where they are licensed or certified solely because they performed an abortion in that state. And so the amends that took place since our last meeting actually added that second provision that I just said, the one that goes further to prohibit boards from imposing discipline on licensees if they are disciplined in another state for performing abortion where they were licensed. And the board currently has a support position on this bill. Okay, now for the indirect impact ones, and there's only 3 of these. First is Assembly Bill 1120 from Assemblymember Irwin. And as it's currently written, this bill authorizes a certified phlebotomy technician to collect blood through a peripheral venous catheter. I had to say that a couple times. I'm not gonna lie, including the blood collect or under specified conditions, including that the blood collection is performed using a device approved by the FDA. So the most recent amends just for the most part make some clarifying changes to various sections of the bill. And some of these changes include removing outdated provisions that were in the code that specified conditions that would allow an unlicensed person employed by a clinical laboratory to perform venipuncture or skin puncture for the purpose of withdrawing blood. The bill also now clarifies that an applicant for certification as a phlebotomy technician who has at least 1,040 hours of work experience that includes at least 50 successful venipunctures shall complete at least 20 hours of didactic instruction. And the board currently has an opposed position on this bill. And the next bill is Senate Bill 731 from Senator Derazo. And this bill expands automatic arrest record and conviction relief to include additional felony offenses, and also expands discretionary expungement relief to include felonies where the defendant was sentenced to state prison rather than just realigned felonies. So this one I don't believe has come before the board for quite some time because it was a 2-year bill that's been on the inactive file pretty much the whole session. And it just kind of got resurrected and brought back with some minor amends. And those amends include clarifying that conviction relief is excluded in cases where the felony resulted in a requirement to register as a sex offender, and add some clarifications around how these provisions apply in an educational setting. It requires the DOJ to provide background information to school districts, county offices of education, charter schools, private schools, and state special schools for the blind and deaf. And also the conviction record relief does not affect the authority to receive or take adverse action based on criminal history if it's for the purpose of teacher credentialing or employment in public education. And the board has had a watch position on that bill. And lastly is Senate Bill 1475 by Senator Glazer. As it's currently written, this bill would authorize blood collection at a blood bank when a physician or a surgeon is not physically present, if the medical director and their medical advisory committee approve, and if the employee placed in charge is a registered nurse. The bill would authorize the registered nurse placed in charge to be physically present or available via telehealth, so long as the method of telehealth used is synchronous. The bill would also require blood banks to report annually on any adverse donor events that required emergency medical intervention, including reporting whether or not a registered nurse was physically present on the premises at the time. And the bill also sunsets as of January 1, 2028. So it would be 5 years after the effective date if it were to pass. And so the amends that have taken place since we last met at the end of June, we're adding the provision around blood banks being required to report annually on any adverse donor events that required emergency medical intervention and whether or not a registered nurse was physically present. And so the board's current position on this bill as well is an oppose. So I will stop here and open it up for any questions on those amendments or changes. Happy to go deeper into any of them, but just want to give you a broad look at what's happened since we met last.
Thank you, Marissa. These amendments don't appear to be of any significant impact on the bill. So I'd like to open it up first before a motion to the board to make any questions or have any questions or comments.
So real quick, just for clarifying, Dolores, if you guys are not changing any positions on this, we don't need to take it to a vote. Our position stand. This can be information only, and we can go to the discussion around the bills that we would be looking at discussing other than just this. If the board thinks that the provisions that are outlined in the amendments require a change in the position, then we can pull that bill out, have a more robust discussion and change the vote. But if there is no change to positions, we don't need to have a vote on that one or a motion.
I would like to see if the board has any questions or comments before going to public comment.
This is Betty. I wanted some clarification on SB 731. I'm not clear what the understanding is about the last sentence. About the release of felonies and the realignment of felonies. I don't understand that.
Oh, I believe referring to realignment mean county level, and so versus state level. So there's certain offenses that are, I believe there's, and I will honestly say DOJ is not my area of expertise, although Tricia may be able to help, that there's certain convictions that are eligible for automatic conviction relief that I believe DOJ looks at routinely, and there's certain criteria, and then there's some that have like discretionary relief where you can ask. And so one of the changes that was made recently when this bill was resurrected is that, let me pull it up just so I'm giving you the proper summary of it. I believe it applies now to if you were serving state prison versus in any type of county charges.
I still don't quite understand it, so I'd like a better explanation.
I think if you're, Betty, if you're looking for just a definition on realigned felonies, I know that within San Diego County, they have split sentences where you can do part of the time served in jail and part of the time served in a intense community supervision by a probation officer, or they can choose to do it as straight time in jail. And there are specific felonies that fall underneath that, and that's completely within the judicial system, not within our board. And so with this, what was our board position on this one?
Watch.
This
Was
one was
a watch.
so,
Yeah.
with this information, if that changes your vote to an oppose or a support, we can do that, Betty, or we can continue to watch and see how this goes.
Well,
And so what it does is it deletes, there used to be a prohibition on granting relief, arrest or conviction relief, if the person was incarcerated in state prison. And this removes that prohibition to make also some of those instances available potentially for the relief. So it expands essentially eligibility for this relief. And like Lori had said, it was something that I think the board had been tracking the previous legislative year, because obviously we licensees, there are background checks. And so it's always good to understand type of what information may or may not show up or be relevant. So it wasn't necessarily the direct impact. And it's been sitting inactive for a while and then just came kind of back alive.
okay. Yeah, I don't mind watching it to see what's going to go on with it.
I have a couple of comments. Thank you, Marissa. I know at this time of year, it is just fast and furious over there. And so we've just gone through an awful lot of information with amendments. And I didn't hear one thing that I thought, oh, we really ought to change our position on that. But I did pay particular attention to that blood donor. And I mean, I suppose it's gotten better, but I still believe we really need to have a nurse on site when there's you know, a blood drive. So I don't think that I would suggest that we change our position, but I wonder if, just kind of going through that long list, if there was anything that you saw that you thought, oh, you know, maybe we really ought to give that you know, a relook.
Personally, when I was going through, it didn't seem like any of the amendments changed the broader intent of the bill that I believe was the reason the board maybe took the position. Obviously, I wasn't here for the discussion for some of these bills, but I think the intent around them hasn't been changed significantly by these amends. So there wasn't any that I felt was like, oh, that's a complete, you know, 180. I think the only one that kind of took a substantive change maybe was 852, just because it was moving provisions from one to our sunset bill, but that e-prescription stuff is the same. So that was probably the largest change that I think would make any difference personally, but I'll defer to Dolores and Lori if they have any other thoughts on them.
Thank you.
And then just to add on to that, Tricia, when Marissa reviews these, she does bring it to me for review as well. And I had the same understanding as Marissa did. It did not look like there was anything that would change the board's intent of why they took a position of support, watch, or oppose. And so I didn't see anything that stood out that was like, hey, we need to make sure that this is covered. But we did feel that it was important for you guys to know about the amends that were happening. And so that is why we had her go ahead and report out on this through this forum.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did appreciate though on the one about the blood banks that if it does end up passing, that it sunsets and that there will be data demonstrating was there negative outcomes or not. Because that's the piece, in my opinion, I think there's an intent to want to have a nurse there, but just not being able to get one. And then the blood drive gets canceled. So it ends up, and we've talked about this at previous meetings, you know, impacting our ability to have blood available to people who need it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And data is really what we're all after. So I love that those provisions have been added in the chance that this does go forward.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? All right, BRM moderator, can you please open it up for public comment?
So Dolores, real quick, I don't believe we need to go to public comment at this point because this is one agenda item. Is that my understanding, where we will continue to speak about some of the other bills that are in front of us? So because there was no motion to change, we're still working on the same agenda item. I do not believe we need to go out to public comment at this point. So we will go on and start the next topic. That would be the one bill that has made a lot of changes and will probably continue to have some changes go through until the 15th. And that would be our sunset bill.
Okay.
And of course, when we do go to public comment, the public is more than welcome to bring up any of the bills that were discussed
Definitely.
up till now or since now.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So yes, you may have noticed on the list of amended bills, AB 2684 was not on there just because we figured that would be a more of a substantive discussion. So just a minor update, since the board last met in June, and board staff has been having a good amount of productive conversations, both with the committee staff and stakeholders regarding those outstanding areas of concern that were identified at the June meeting. And another round of amendments was published last Friday. And as Lori said, we are anticipating probably one more set of amendments will occur before the legislative deadline to amend the bills, which is next Thursday, August 25th. So I'll turn it over to Lori now to kind of do a deeper dive into the various provisions.
Thank you. I promise this will not be as lengthy as it was last time. So hopefully you guys can follow along and stay involved. And it's a much different conversation. So Marissa did reach out to Vince Chi, which is our ledge staff that we're really working with, along with Alyssa, to get some information. She reached out to him yesterday and asked if there was anything new for us to bring forward to the board. And they said, nope, they're still sifting through the outstanding asks to see what changes to take in the final set of amendments. And then reiterating with what Marissa said, with final amendments are due by next Thursday, with the intent to leave the last house on the 31st of August and hopefully get signed a month later by the governor. So on the agenda, you can click on AB 2684. This is our sunset bill. You can go into ledge info. And if you click on the section that says today's law as amended, you can see that all of the black text is text that is currently in law. So we don't need to opine on that or discuss that unless that's something, of course, that you guys want to, but that is current law and that's not being amended by the sunset. So when you look at the blue text in there, that blue text is added text. And then the red text that has a line through it is either moved or removed text. And so I wanted to make sure to really point that out. And so I can go through section by section as quickly as possible. So section 1, you will see that they just did some language cleanup and added a statement about the 103 and the 104 NP. And this is some of the stuff that Marissa brought up that was in AB 852 that was intended for cleanup of the AB 890 bill, where there was just some catches that needed to really go forward and be updated in our code in order to implement the new scope of practice for the 103 and the 104 MPs. So the board previously voted to support that. And so that section, and we'll move to section 2. Again, in section 2, it goes through and calls out again the 103 and the 104 NPs. And provide some additional clarification there. Our board previously had supported that. Section 3 is a cleanup more on the 103 and the 104 practicing, and our board had previously voted to support that as well. Section 4 was just in there for just some cleanup language. I'm not sure if you guys noticed, it extends our date to 2027. So it is definitely substantial. It does give us a 4-year sunset, which will allow us to continue to implement all of these improvements that we've talked about and continue to go and do the work of public protection that our board does really well. So that's a wonderful thing that is in section 4. Our board had voted to support that section. My understanding is I think we will still support that section. Section number 5 talks about the governor. Previously, the governor was able to remove any board member, even if it wasn't appointed by the governor. So this language cleanup says that if it's appointed by a different authority other than the governor does not have the right to remove that person, that it does go to the appointing authority to do any kind of removal of the board member, just as if they would be with appointing that. And our board has supported that section. Section 6 talks about the executive officer. And it allows me currently and any EO that may come after me, because I am at the will of the board and appointed. So at that point, if I stay in my position or any executive officer stays in the position, they can still remain in effect by appointment by the board until the 2027 sunset date again, or until new statute is enacted. And previously our board supported this section, and my understanding is the board would continue to support. Section 7 is a little bit of an update. The original understanding of Section 7 was they were going to remove this language completely. This language has not been removed. It was moved to a subsequent section on clinical placements. And so it is still here. It is still relevant. This section came from passing AB 1015 last year. And AB 1015 was written to address the California state audit recommendations to the legislator. Blanca Rubio addressed that, got that passed, and it went into BPC 2717. And this is just cleaning it up and putting it in a different location within our NPA. So I would assume that our board would now support this with the new information that is gained, because I think the board previously opposed this because we thought that it was removed. So I'm here for any questions on this section, and we can continue to move forward. Section 8 is a board ask. We specifically reached out to legislative staff and asked them to combine our nurse practitioner and our nurse midwife applications. Currently, the nurse midwife or nurse practitioner will have to apply for a license or certification and an additional application for a furnishing number. And we wanted to make this easier on the applicant by combining the applications and therefore reducing the fee that has to be paid by them to do a single application process versus a double application process. And this is a board ask. And so my assumption is we would continue to support that. And you will see that this one here specifically addressed the nurse midwife, and further down you'll see where it addresses the nurse practitioner. Section 9 removes fee floors. And so in many of the sections as we go through, you'll see where they're lined out the fee floors. And that's in alignment with what the budget report out said today, is that we are in good standing with our budget. We are set at the minimum requirements for each one of our fees. And so prior to this change that we've asked for be transferred into law, we could not decrease our fees any lower, even if we wanted to, without a legislative change. So we have asked for this legislative change to remove all fee floors, and that will allow the board at its discretion by doing desk audits or studies or something to say, yes, we can decrease the fee on this. Or keep it as is, or increase up to a limit. The increase up to the limit stands. We did not get that removed or ask for that to be removed. We only were asked to have the fee floors removed. And again, I believe that our board would support this and had previously supported this. Section 10 is the Nurse Education Workforce Advisory Committee. And our board did support this as well. We do have a charter already out, and we have our committee meeting and producing valuable feedback as we've received for an earlier agenda item today on 16 CCR 1410.5. And so this just codifies that. It makes it a statutory supported advisory committee. We do need to hold these committees twice a year, with one being focused on education and one being focused on workforce. They are able to have subcommittees with a member of 2 people from that committee without violating Bagley-Keene to work on items in between. The only area in this section that we noticed on review that gave us a little bit of concern is 2785.6, and it's 2B. And it says that the subcommittees may be comprised of committee members or any other member that the committee determines is necessary for the work of the subcommittee. We recommended, as approved by the board, this is an advisory committee to the board, and the members are appointed by the board's executive officer. The process of adding additional members to serve on an advisory committee subcommittee should include vetting and approval from the board, since it essentially expands the original advisory committee membership. Again, Reza, our board legal counsel, opined on this at a nurse midwife advisory committee on whether or not additional members could be added to a subcommittee. I know that that was an ask for the midwives as well, and probably in response to the language and the stakeholder kind of conversations around this section. The idea was that we went from a 29 member committee and dropped it down to a 15 member committee to really streamline the process. And additionally, we have been working towards separating the Board of Registered Nursing as a policymaking board that looks at the protection of the public away from nursing organizations that are looking at promotion of the profession. And so the concerns that were raised is that this may blur that and could potentially show an unfair citing of people that would be chosen by the individual advisory committee members to come in and participate in these subcommittees. The clarification that was given by Reza and myself is that any of these advisory committee members at any point can consult with, seek guidance, information share with anybody that they choose to at any point. And it wouldn't be a violation of Bagley-Keene. It would not hinder the ability of them to serve on these committees. And to have that codified in this kind of language is abnormal and something new that the board would have to address. So that is an area where we specifically called out as an item of continued concern from the board, and are continuing to work with legislative staff on working through that. And they mentioned that they would be taking this information back to stakeholders and getting some feedback as well. Does the board have any comments on this, or Reza, did you have anything further to explain on the adding of additional subcommittee members by a subcommittee that is part of an advisory committee to our board? Thank you.
Sure, this is Reza. I'll just briefly chime in on that since you brought it up. At the last meeting, somebody asked, I think the focus of the questions was about communications amongst subcommittee members outside of meetings. So we clarified that a subcommittee of 2 members of the committee could meet and discuss outside of an actual noticed public committee meeting, and discuss and do the work that they need to do to further kind of dive into these issues that are assigned to them, and then report back at a public meeting, as long as they are not, then broadcasting their thoughts and findings to the other committee members in between meetings. That was kind of the clarification that I made, and a follow-up question that was asked was, I think that, like Lori said, can these subcommittees of 2 committee members then communicate with other stakeholders like representatives of various associations and whatnot. So as Lori said, yeah, we clarify that they absolutely can consult. It starts to become an issue as far as Bagley-Keene if the committee is comprised of, if the subcommittee is made up of, say, 2 members of the NEWAC plus officially, a representative of another association or something, then you have 3 members, and that crosses the threshold, and any discussions would need to be in a public meeting. So these 2-person subcommittees, and the focus on that discussion was really around that, the 2-person kind of cap on actual members of the subcommittee to be able to be compliant with the law and also have this work done and progress made outside of meetings and reported later. On this, the piece about subcommittees being able to take on other members, the way I read it, it reads the subcommittees may be comprised of committee members or any other members that the committee determines is necessary for the work of the subcommittees. So it sounds like it wouldn't necessarily, at least per the kind of literal language here, wouldn't be brought to the board who's on these subcommittees. The committee itself, the NEWAC would make up the composition, and they could go beyond just the members of that committee and bring on, as it says, anyone that they determine is necessary for the work of the subcommittee. So you can look at it either way. It grants them some flexibility on who they appoint. Like I think Lori alluded to, there's always the concern in the back of our mind to just try to kind of limit the the lobbying that occurs and try to kind of keep that where it belongs. But that was really it, I think, unless anyone has any specific questions.
Yeah, I have a comment. I agree with you, Lori and Reza. I don't think that committee members should be appointing other committee members. I think that we could suggest clarifying language that would say something, and other, and other individuals that they'd like to consult with. But this particular sentence makes it look like they've got appointing authority. And I think we should just be very clear about that. Of course, we want them to solicit input from stakeholders. That's kind of part of what this whole committee is about. But we should make it very clear that it's a consulting or advisory, a role rather than a committee membership.
May I also add, in agreement with Reza, I do concur. The way I would say it more colorfully from my experience is it will poison the well. And that's an easy way to lose control of the system, the information, and the intention of the original committee in the first place. Secondly, the idea of a subcommittee mucking up the infrastructure is an experience some of us, I'm sure, have been in, where you have a subcommittee of a committee of a subcommittee where you end up literally tripping over yourselves with one too many subs. And it seems irrelevant and unnecessary and makes me wonder why it has been included at all, why it shouldn't be deleted.
This was a new amend. We were not aware that this was actually coming until the language was there, and we did immediately respond back that we didn't think that this was an appropriate amend. So I will keep you guys updated on how that moves forward. And currently, the board's position is support if amended. And so this will be one of them that I continue to work towards the amendment ask. And so thank you guys on that. With that information, I will move on to section 11. Section 11 is probably the biggest impact that we've come across so far within our Sunset Bill. And that is really looking at the approved school of nurses and going through that process. And so we'll go and talk about section 11 and then immediately follow that through with section 12, which will further clarify that, and section 13. They all are kind of intertwined. And so I want to make sure that we kind of cover those specifically, and section 14. So section 11 talks about, board approved schools. And so this is absolutely in the blue text, it starts with 2, and in A, B, and C, not C, A and B, 2A and B, that is an ask from our board. Our board went ahead and updated regulatory language to address 16 CCR 1426. Our board voted to support that with that language and bring it forward. And we had a lot of really great support coming from COADN, which is our community colleges, and other stakeholders to move in this direction. With that information, our board voted to move forward with the regulatory package, knowing that it could take a couple years. We've seen that today with our regulatory packages pushing up from being introduced in November of 2020, and we need to wrap this up for November of 2022. So we asked that this be added to our sunset bill so that we can implement as soon as January, really speeding up that process and answering the This is adding the 500 direct patient care hour requirement, the minimum of 30 hours in each one. And then we would just document that, and they're not required to track the minimum clinical hours for an individual student. We would do that on a curricular plan where they say these hours live in these sections, and we would review that and approve that. That was a concern from the stakeholders that we wouldn't track individual. That would be a data nightmare for them. And I think our NECs would probably have a coup at that point and walk out, because it would be a huge, huge workload for them. And I would never want that to happen. So with the trust that we have of our program directors and really working together on this, I think we came up with a really good solution here. And this allows for increased simulation use. And that has been the ask from our programs for many, many years, to go up to 50% simulation, et cetera, et cetera. The problem that the board has had with implementing that earlier is that we didn't have a baseline. So there was no 50% of what, right? And so that became problematic when we didn't have a baseline. And the understanding of stakeholders was that the board kind of manage simulation, and our board has stayed silent on simulation. We don't have any regulatory authority or statutory authority over simulation. That was added in the NEWAC committee above so that we can study and recommend standards of simulation. And so once we get that evidence, I think that would really help us to move forward on that section. But currently this answers a lot, where it really will address some clinical impaction issues by decreasing that 500, that direct patient care down to 500, making it equitable for all areas, and allowing them to do anything above 500 hours that is in their curriculum in simulation. So increasing their simulation at that. And I think that just showed a lot of really great compromise and work between the stakeholders and our board. So that area there is something our board supported. The number 3 section on that, where it says that an approved school of nursing or nursing program may cover fewer than 2 academic years if approved to provide a course of instruction that prepares a licensed vocational nurse, licensed under vocational nursing practice, and for a license under this chapter. That's a big improvement as well. What previously happened is we had a law in that was said that you couldn't go less than 2 academic years. And so we would have to approve a nursing program with a generic curriculum from inception to exit. It's a generic curriculum that would answer all of the course requirements outlined in 1426. If you're doing strictly a pathway for LVNs to become an RN, you don't need all of those courses. And because you wouldn't need all of those courses, you could condense to less than 2 years. And so this allows for a pathway for that entry into practice for our LVNs that want to go back for an RN to maybe go to a specialized school that's all they do, that they would not have generic ADN or BSN students, that they would strictly just serve an LVN who wants to go back and get licensed as an RN. And so this opens that pathway for them. And again, our board approved that previously. The next language that you'll see is where they added in C1 and 2, and then a list of provisions that this is allows, so I'll back up a little bit. Previously with the state of emergency, AB 2288 was introduced. In AB 2288, the board opposed. In AB 2288, it allowed for provisions during the state of emergency that would allow for direct patient care hours to be decreased, simulation to be increased, and concurrency of theory and clinical. We talked about the concurrency of theory and clinical earlier on in our board meeting today. To not occur. that did put in provisions that said that if you would do all of your hours not in direct patient care with the theory component, and only hours that couldn't be completed in direct patient care during that semester could be carried over to the following semester. And so that was a compromise that was made between the bill writer, DCA, BRN when looking at public protection, even though the board opposed this. And so it was stated that because this is unforeseen circumstances, because this is a state of emergency, that this is something that the concurrency issue could be kind of relaxed a bit. This was not something that we intended to kind of keep forever, absent of a state of emergency. This is one of the sections that has been brought forward to continue after the state of emergency, and not defined that it would have to take place at anywhere within a state of emergency. The defining factors are in there that talk about a loss of a clinical site, and it doesn't say how many. So what it says is whenever an agency or facility used by an approved nursing program for direct patient care clinical hours is no longer available or sufficient, the director of the approved nursing program may submit to a board nursing education consultant a request that the approved nursing program allow theory to proceed clinical if all of the following conditions are met. I know that I've heard from union representatives that they're not in support of this. I know that I've heard from the schools that they are in support of this. Historically, the board has not been in support of this. It does delineate a process that has to be followed. And to be absolutely honest, this provision had occurred previously with NECs in historical perspective outside of the state of emergency when it was implemented with AB 2288, because we would have program directors reach out to the NEC and say, the hospital we were doing clinicals at burnt down, and my students are missing 12 hours. And so they would then give that student an incomplete. They would have 2 weeks after the end of the semester to clear that incomplete, and those clinical hours would be made up at that point, which would then give them a completed grade that would then move them on to the next course. That's not necessarily how this is written, but I did want to let you know that we had some provisions in place to manage this prior to COVID. And it did not need to have this provision here because we went through what Department of Education allows, which are incomplete grade issuance, a time-specific period to make up those hours before entering into the next semester. So with this, our board has always said that clinical and theory should be done together concurrently. And they really, when you look at STEM education, et cetera, it is talking about doing that hands-on with the theory, and it's complementary, and you retain that information. And that's really where the evidence sits. But this is asking for that to be changed and done to be outside of a state of emergency. I will be bringing information forward in November on the NCLEX pass rates that has been affected in the last few years of the COVID provisions and potentially other provisions. We don't have that specific data, but you will even see in our NCLEX report earlier on that our NCLEX numbers have dropped. Statewide across the board, they have dropped. There are a few schools that have kept or maintained, but the majority have dropped exponentially. I know that there is one school right now that is being followed that almost had a 12% decrease in their pass rates over 2 years. And so that is something that, even though they're still above 75%, which is our cutoff, that's a huge impact, and something that we need to be aware of. And so really is, I know that a lot of people are asking for provisions that were put in place in a state of emergency to continue because they think that it benefited. My concern here is that there may not be proof that shows that this is a benefit for the students. It does not mean that it's not a benefit for the clinical sites or the academic institutions when it comes to that flexibility for them to progress and ultimately graduate. And so just take that into consideration. I will stop at this moment before we go to the other sections so that we can have a conversation about this if any of the members have any questions. Yes, Trisha.
Okay, yeah.
You're on mute, I believe. I'm not sure. I'm not
Thank you
hearing
very much, Lori. When I read this yesterday, you know, it does seem like it gives the facility the ability to make a determination that the clinical setting is, it seems like it's flipped it. Like under the emergency rule, you know, there's a state of emergency. And so we're basically saying it's hard to do the clinical, but this looks like it gives the facility, you know, the programs the authority to make a determination that the clinical hours are not sufficient. It does say that they need to consult with the board nursing education consultant. But yeah, I would be very opposed to this provision. I don't think it's in a nurse's best interest to have a reduction in clinical hours. So,
real quick, some clarification on that. When COVID hit and we had a huge impact, the only thing that changed is that the healthcare facilities that previously allowed students to come in, they did not allow them to come in. That was their public protection, right? That was what they did to say, I am shutting it down. I am stopping the spread. We are having the students leave. And so they considered them volunteers or guests. And I understand that that happened immediately before we were able to kind of really get data to back that. Some institutions did decide to open back up to students, and some are opening all the way back up to students. Not everybody has followed suit, and clinical placements are still difficult. There is clinical impaction, and we've been really tasked with monitoring this. The change that happened here is previously the clinical site that was lost had to be from a county that had a declared state of emergency. And the clinical site that was lost had to have been in a direct relation to that declared state of emergency. And then the school would bring that information forward to the NEC for consideration for this provision to follow. The change that happened here is that it's with the loss of any clinical facility. It does not have to be related to a state of emergency, and it doesn't have to be as an effect of the state of emergency. The other provisions stand and are identical to what was given to them earlier, where the NEC has to review it and approve it, et cetera. But so hopefully that provided just a little bit of clarification.
I have a question. I just want to, because it seems to me, and tell me if I'm misunderstanding this or misinterpreting it, but there's some pretty significant guardrails around if this would happen. So if a facility closes and you've got, you know, nursing students who are in their theory class and now they're unable to, for no fault of their own, do their clinical, they have to look and see, they have to notify the NEC, they have to make sure that there's no other site within 25 miles, right? And the NECs know all the sites, right? So to me,
we don't know all the sites, but we're working hard on that. And those are the
that's
same
part of the
provisions.
provision, isn't that we need to know the sites?
Well, we use a lot of databases, but really the deans and directors know their area the most. And so they provide us with that information and we validate that information. And those are the exact same provisions that were part of the state of emergency. This is not new language. The only new language that was changed from 2288 is that it doesn't have to be activated by a state of emergency. But all of these provisions, Mary, to your input, were identical to what was done with the state of emergency. These guardrails have been in place since 2020.
Just, can you think of situations when nursing students are going to be doing their theory and they're going to have no potential to be able to do their clinical, but they could do it in the summer, say, but they can't do it in the spring, and that we would be just slowing down their ability to complete their program by a semester because we're saying you absolutely must do it at the same time? Because that's what I'm
So-
concerned about. If it's a difference between, taking my theory in March and then I'm going to start my clinical in June. But we were saying, no, you can't. Now you're going to have to graduate 3 months later.
Yeah, so what typically happens here, and this is why the board has such an important role when we're looking at enrollment increases and we're looking at resources, is you should have adequate resources to be able to manage through unexpected occurrences. If you have a program that only has one OB site and that is it, and unfortunately we have programs that only have one OB site, and that OB site goes through a remodel, has an influx of travelers, or they've lost a bunch of staff, they a lot of times will say, I can't take a clinical group right now. And because of the impaction, that does negatively affect the students and absolutely halts them from progression. Is the question that's kind of needs to be discussed here is whether or not that's something we want to continue to perpetuate, or do we want to really advocate for schools to be prepared to support the students if something unexpected occurs? So that was definitely a question that was kind of pushed around and discussed in AB 2288. The other thing that is a concern with this is our schools have stated repeatedly that they are tapped out on clinical sites. So what I had said in our sunset hearing, I believe in the second sunset hearing that we had last year, was it's like a bad payday loan. You'll move these remaining clinical hours that were not able to be completed in semester 2 to semester 3, and you already have clinical hours that you're having difficulty completing in semester 3. So now you have an added impact to semester 3. And so then you collect up on the first ones, you start in on the second ones that are already scheduled, and now you can't complete those. And so then you move that to the next semester. The other thing to take into consideration with this is there are a lot of schools that do not have the resources to hold an intersession, and they will not have a summer session or a winter session to address this. So you have information that was given to the students starting in January in their 16 or 18-week semester, and then they are off for the summer. And anybody that's in education, when you take that summer off, that information doesn't always retain, and you have to go back in the fall and kind of re-up them, spend some time bringing them forward to get them prepared to go to clinicals. And by that point, that instructor that is for that contact information is not in contact with the students because that theory course is already done. They're just completing the clinical part. And so there are areas of concern, absolute areas of concern. Does it mean that this provision shouldn't be there? I don't know, because it does, again, like you said, Mary, answer the need of not halting the progression of a student. But by not halting the progression of the student, are you affecting their overall education preparedness because the academic institution is not able to support the student, probably by no fault of their own, but by increased program growth in their community next to them, and they don't have the ability to get the clinical sites to accept them or give them additional hours. And so those are a lot of the really kind of high level conversations that probably need to be discussed around this item. David, I know that I saw your hand up, and Mary, I'm not sure if you had any follow-up questions.
Well, I was just going to comment on what you just said about the learning loss, the academic retention. If you spend one semester in theory and then you take even a week off and then try and apply that clinically, the reality of your clinical limitations, I don't want to ignore, but it's not a question so much as I'm wondering why they would write this kind of language, which contradicts any learning pedagogy or understanding of STEM learning, where they need to happen concurrently. And I understand state of emergency. I get COVID. Maybe your clinicians or something's tapped out, but this just seems like it is setting your nurses up to fail, in my opinion, because I don't want to talk about how to fill a cavity in March and then be forced to try and do it in August. Does that make sense?
It does.
So I look at, as an educator, I look at this and think, the author needs to sit down with the teacher and revise this language. I don't like it at all.
We will note
And
that.
am I wrong? I don't know. Am I wrong to take
No.
issue with letter C, where it says, if no direct patient care experiences are available? I know there was, isn't that getting better? I mean, as a public
Not yet.
member, I think, where can you not do your clinical?
The problem is we have a workforce shortage that is being really promoted that the board needs to answer. And what is being said at a national level and what's being said at a state level, it varies. And so we do have a research analyst that collects data and looks at it. And they have made statements of what they believe that our California specific shortage will be. And that it's not a statewide shortage, it is regional areas that have shortages. Additionally, there's a lot of information that goes into those shortages, and that is getting nursing students or prospective students to be enrolled into programs in those areas of need, right? And so for the majority, there are schools that are looking into going into those regions of shortage, developing schools, expanding enrollment in those areas, and addressing that need in those regions. And that's fantastic. What becomes problematic that our board has been tasked to really look at is if there's an area that has adequate nurses, that has an adequate number of schools there, and their enrollment numbers are growing or at least staying the same, and they have clinical placements in there, growing into those areas, that impaction that happens. And so that, again, we will continue to discuss as we get into some of these provisions that are a little nerve-wracking to what our board's position has been on protection of the public as we go forward. But your feedback is duly noted, and I'm sure that will go out in our updated opposition letter, and we'll document this here. And just for everybody to know, Vince Chi, who has been amazing to work with over the last month, is on our call, and he is one of the staff members that has been working with us at the legislative level, and I'm sure he's taking all of this information in. So it's good to have him on here. So we'll move to the next section here, which addresses that I would do a uniform method, or somebody in my position would do a uniform method for evaluating requests and granting approvals. The majority of our uniform methods are outlined in regulation and statute, so I have absolutely no problem doing this. They will be clearly communicated out and available on our website. And the board's nursing education consultants work with me extensively on this. They're truly like the ghost writer when it comes to these, and they will provide feedback and follow that. We've also, over the last couple of years with the impact of COVID and going to a more remote based, we've really increased our contact with the NECs. Under the direction of the previous EO, the NECs no longer met as a joint NEC group prior to committee meetings, and that is not the fact anymore. We now meet at minimum once a week, if not twice a week. And all orientation and onboarding for new NECs are done as a complete whole, so that if there is ever any questions or discussion that needs to be had, everybody is on board and everybody is available and aware of that. So a lot of changes in that department, so we have no problem implementing the other areas in that section. Section 12, I think, is the one that gives me the most heartburn. There was a lot of work done on this, and still some outstanding areas on here. This has been a long time ask by the colleges and universities, and we must maintain board approval in order for our schools to be able to graduate students that are eligible to take the NCLEX. That is a requirement from NCSBN that they graduate or complete the program from a board-approved nursing program. So that withstanding, the ask from the colleges and university is, hey, I have an accreditation, which is more than an approval, a board approval. Can't we just be more relaxed and go by a lot of their measures? It's obviously we're doing well with this accreditation. Can we get that recognized? And by all means, yes, absolutely, let's get that recognized. And so even prior to this legislation being introduced, we moved to doing joint visits. Previously, we did our visits completely separate from any kind of accreditors. And that we heard that the program directors were not happy with that. And so we did do joint visits, and we've been doing joint visits now with the accreditors on the accreditors' schedules, which went from like a 5-year visit to an 8-year visit or a 10-year visit with a 5-year interim report. And we've been doing that for a year. So that has worked out wonderfully. We do have some kinks and some stuff to work out just because it's a learning curve for our NECs and our program directors, but we are well on our way for that. So that is fantastic. We also used to require them to complete a separate self-study report specific for us and a separate one for the accreditors. And that did not make sense anymore. So we will accept the report from the accreditors, and any areas that do not address our specific law, whether it's statute or regulation, they just would do a amendment to address that, provide us a crosswalk, and no additional work is done. And that has been captured in this bill as well, which we fully accept. Accepting the continuing accreditation decisions from accreditors, that's a no-brainer for us as well. If the accreditors say they go for 8 years, we will do the visit with them 8 years later. If they say they're good to go for 10 years and they just want a 5-year report, we are in line with that. We will do the 10 years with a 5-year report. Again, not withholding. Number 2 down at the bottom there says upon complaint or other evidence that approved school of nursing does not meet the board standards, the board may withhold approval under this condition. And, you know, we could also adopt other areas with that. So they did give us some flexibility with that if we started to hear some complaints come. And that's great. When it comes to one of the big discussions here, there's 3 areas that we need to really kind of have a substantive conversation on. And that is one where it says accept the faculty hiring decisions made by the approved program director. That is my understanding is a chair ask. I'm not sure that that will be amended, but we did propose a separate faculty approval process. To put this out into the public, what the board had been doing previously has been seen as a hindrance, and I understand that. The current process, before we started to make changes, requires a RN to go to an academic institution and apply for a job. If you've had any kind of interactions on these board meetings with talking about resources and adequacy of resources, you could see that that's a difficult process for a lot of our community colleges. They have to get into a hiring committee. They have to get priority hiring. They have to advertise for a position. They have to get enough applicants in, and it has to go through a hiring committee, interviewed, and then make a decision. And then at that time of decision, the board approved director submits this RN's information to the NECs for approval. If they don't meet the qualifications outlined in the BRN, they've just wasted all of that time because we now deny their approval. And that is really not the way forward. So when I was looking at the faculty approval process outside of Sunset, I said, what can we do to really fix this? And we had a lot of meeting with our NECs and came up with a lot of really good input. We met with deans and directors and did kind of a workforce every other week meeting on some of these issues. And we came up with the idea that approving faculty that mirror the Commission on Teaching credentialing would be really the appropriate way to go. We hear from our stakeholders that there's a huge faculty shortage. that faculty shortage is palpable. Without adequate faculty, you can't increase your student numbers. You can't increase enrollments because you don't have anybody to teach them. And without being able to pay a good wage to those faculty, you're not going to recruit them. We cannot address faculty wages here, but we can increase the access to becoming a faculty. And that's something I think that our board absolutely can do. So the proposal is to remove the faculty approval from the academic institutions. It does not need to be their burden to bear, and create this as an individual RN application that says, hey, I'm an RN and I want to be a teacher. I'm going to apply to the board to get approved. To me, that will open up our faculty approval process to many, many people. That previous way of getting approval relied on being chosen by an academic institution for hire before they can become a faculty member. That limits many, many people who may want to be a faculty member because they might not be right for that institution. It doesn't mean that they're not right to be a faculty member. They may not fit that institution. So relying on the academic institution to submit a faculty approval is backwards. To really kind of bring this into a layperson's perspective, if you want to be a truck driver, you're going to go to school, apply for your CDL, get licensed with your CDL before you go and apply at a truck driving employer to say, hey, I'm qualified. And we need to come into alignment with that. And so that was the proposal. The other added benefit that does is we've tied it already to our Breeze license lookup. What was not there before is nobody knew who had a faculty approval unless they contacted the board's NEC. So now we have the ability for you guys to go online, look at the DCA data license lookup, and anybody that has an approved faculty position or approved faculty approval will be able to, it's tied to your RN license. Now, tonight is the expected rollout of over 10,000 faculty approvals to be added into our Breeze system. So I'm praying everything goes well, and I'm praying that tomorrow I'll type in my name and I will see that I have faculty approvals in there. That would be my one kind of test to make sure that it rolled out. But it will be very exciting to have greater than 10,000 faculty approvals on our license lookup that a academic institution can, as of tomorrow, go in there, look them up, and hire them without having to have any approval process through the BRN because that approval already stands. Additional to that information is we have their address of record, so we can get and share regional data. We can show growth of faculty, we can show recession of faculty, we can show location of faculty. So when the board is considering enrollment decisions, we have evidence on resource availability. Because again, you can't teach more students if you don't have the faculty to teach them. And so with the faculty crisis right now, this is something that we can absolutely give back to the community to share this information. So we're waiting to hear if the committee chairs will accept the BRN's proposal to get that updated in statute. We did hear that we did have some support through COADN, et cetera. So we're waiting to hear more on that. The other one is E, where it talks about substantive change request. Previously in a board meeting, we talked about the update to 1432, and 1432 defines what a substantive change is. And two items that are included in that substantive change outside of enrollment increase is a new campus or a change in location. And what the ask is here is that if an accreditor says this new campus location or addition of a new campus is appropriate, that they just have to let us know. And I understand that is a process that would be expedited, but that is not necessarily in the taking into consideration public interaction. Right now, we have to have a 10-day posting period for agendas, and we hold public comment for every single agenda item. And because of that, we welcome the public to come in and have input on this. These would be things that would occur without public input, and we would just be noticed of them. There was conversation around whether or not the impact of a new campus or a location would be substantial if they're not changing enrollment. We have a school that has 2,000 annual enrollments, and they could divide that up to 500 in this location, 500 in a different location, et cetera. And that would absolutely be an impact to that community if they were to have something affect there. So that is absolutely something that would affect the community colleges and affect other organizations, other maybe private industries that would be problematic there. So we would need to take a look at that. The other thing that would be here is to really look at, hang on one second, I'm so sorry, I do have to take a pause at this moment.
Take a couple minutes break. This time it's been a
Let's take a 5.
heavy presentation.
Yeah, let's take a 5 to 3,
Come back to
3:20,
3:20.
3:21. Yeah.
I'm having a family emergency right now. I'm so sorry. I have to get off.
Everybody back? I'm just going to do a real quick roll call to establish quorum. Let me see. Looks like everybody's back. Okay. Dolores is here. Vice President Mary Fagan.
Mary Fagan here.
Elizabeth Woods.
Woods here.
Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita here.
Trisha Nguyen.
Win here.
Vicki Granowitz.
Granowitz here.
And Susan Naranjo. Susan? Do we still have a quorum, Reza? Is Reza back?
I'm here. Sorry, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
Let
hear
me
you
see.
now.
Okay, we got 2, 3.
I believe we do.
Is David here?
Mary is still here. Yeah, I think we've got a quorum still.
This is Susan. I'm back. Sorry.
That's okay. Now we do.
Okay.
Susan had, not Susan, I'm sorry. David had to step away. He will be back.
Okay.
So at this point, Lori was just about at the end of her presentation. And that was going to be the end of the bills. Our previous position on this bill, the sunset bill, was to support if amended. There's still questions on this bill that I think need to be a few areas that need to be worked out. Does the board have any questions or comments from what you've heard so far?
This is Trisha. I mean, I think we have a pretty good understanding of the bill. I guess I would just ask Marissa if she feels empowered to, continue pushing for amendments in the key areas that were outlined. One is the clinical hours waiver, and one is approval versus accreditation, which we just kind of finished up with.
Yes, yeah, I want to unmute. Of course. Yeah, we have been in ongoing conversations with the staff and sharing concerns, those included, and will continue to. So I'll definitely make sure that is brought back to them.
Thank you, Marissa. Any other questions or comments? Is there any questions or comments to either keep the support if amended, or are we looking for something different? My recommendation would be keep the support if amended.
I
That's
would,
a-
this is, I'm sorry, this is Jovita, and I would be on board with that.
Okay,
Me too.
all right. So if there's no more further questions or comments, let's open it up for public comment.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window? Oh, I'm sorry.
Mark,
Hold
I
on
think
here.
there
Yep.
is.
Yep. Saskia Kim would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just a point of clarification quickly. Is this a time to comment on the legislative committee and other bills, or is this just sunset?
Yes.
Let me know how
No.
you'd like me to proceed.
It's for all.
For all. Okay, thank you. Saskia Kim with the California Nurses Association. Appreciate the time today. I just want to quickly comment on 2 bills. Well, the first is SB 1475, which would delete existing law's requirement that blood banks have a nurse physically present during blood draws and instead allow the nurse to supervise the process via telehealth. And unfortunately, the most recent amendments don't change our position. CNA opposes the bill because we believe the presence of an RN is necessary to assess and address complications when a blood donor suffers an adverse health event. Data show that California has a greater incidence of complications than other states, demonstrating the need for the presence of an RN. Nurses are very concerned that patient safety will be put at risk by the change. A transfusion medicine article looking at blood donor complications after whole blood donation stated there are 15 million whole blood donations per year in the United States, and 1/3 of the donors develop one or more adverse events. Proponents of the bill have asserted that removing the restriction will result in an increase in blood donations, but the nationwide shortage of blood donors is a nationwide problem, and it's believed to be caused by multiple factors. And even states that don't have and don't require RNs are also seeing drops in donations. And finally, the collection of whole blood from healthy donors is only one procedure performed in blood bank settings. Other procedures involve a potential for greater risk, so we appreciate the board continuing to oppose that bill. And CNA doesn't have a formal position, maybe 2684, the board's sunset bill, but we do support the full 4-year extension of the board. We support theory and clinical education delivered concurrently and oppose squeezing out public nursing programs out of clinical spots through the rapid and unregulated expansion of private for-profit programs. So thank you for the time today. Appreciate it.
Board President Trujillo, there are no other public requests for comments. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, thank you, Mark. So at this time, this concludes the report for the Legislative Committee. We will now go into closed session. Reza, is there anything else that we need to do before we go into closed session? We will be off camera during closed session, and we will come back to close the meeting on WebEx.
That's right. I think, yeah, we can go ahead and Well, I believe the meeting would remain open, but no business will be done in open session while we're in closed session, and then we'll come back solely to adjourn the meeting. So board members should have the link to the closed session virtual room. If not, please check your emails, and I'll see you.